Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Today, folks, we're going to jump in talking a little bit about what it is going to take to transform culture. I know, sounds like a big pool with a deep end to jump right into, right? And it kind of is, but let's just start very gradually, right? But before we do that, let me preface this, as I do all videos for the most part, by saying that we jump in talking about organizational culture because that's where we come together to meet up, to form up as teams, to have a common pursuit to serve a customer, right? But as all things are connected within the community, within culture, within your organizations outside of work, your family, your friends, all of it's connected, folks. So take what you will and use it in a positive way to hopefully improve and make your lives even more thriving than they may currently be, and for those around you as well. So, that said, let's jump in talking about transforming culture, right? The idea of culture has probably been tossed around more in the last decade, and transformation have been tossed around more, it would seem, in this last decade more than anything. And there have been some wonderfully noble attempts, if I'm talking about organizational culture for a second, by a lot of systems, HR systems and so forth, to try to create a more inviting and connective, environment, right? A more connective environment for the teams and leaders and so on, right? And true, there are trainings, different types of trainings that are involved with all of this, and and it has been probably more systematized than it once, or more so than it's ever been. And it isn't to say that that is fruitless, because it isn't. It's smart. It's smart. You want to help improve everybody's understanding of one another and try to build that team synergy. But let's pan back a little bit and go, okay, what what are some observations potentially that we can make if we want to transform culture, right? So it may be that where you work, say in an organization, everything's humming along well, your turnover is low, productivity is high, got good synergy, people communicate, got a pretty, maybe it's even fun to work there, right? You get along with folks, everybody pretty much gets along, right? There's little bumps, but it's life, right? And you're just humming along. And that may be a certain percentage of you. Okay. More than likely, less than 10%, but we'll just call it what it is and congratulate you on that, right? And then of course you're going to have the converse of that too, right? Those organizations where it is exactly the opposite of that. And then you're going to have a whole lot in the middle where every day is kind of a spin of the wheel, right? And you don't know what you're going to get. Maybe on Monday it's the greatest place to work. On Tuesday it's awful. Wednesday, you see what I'm saying? So you've got a mix. You've got a variable mix in the middle. And that would kind of generally flow with the 80-20 rule, right? Pareto principle, right? It would generally flow with that. And that kind of, checks with the rest of culture. But if our goal is for all of culture to transform, right, in a healthy way going forward, kind of have to make some observations and then marinate on some of those things so that we can maybe improve upon and walk around certain things to figure out how we want to resolve and grow past the certain things. So we have to look at what is preventing culture from transforming. Now, let's address that argument. That might be an argument on its own right there. Is culture transforming? Yes, it is. Okay. I think if we say, well, it's terrible, it's awful, it's transforming, but it's going down this awful road and that sort of thing. And then there may be those saying it's not transforming. It's just, slapping a different sticker on the same old thing. Perhaps, right? I suppose it depends on your lens, right? If you've been around for a couple of decades or more, you might look back in history when you were able to realize certain things and say, oh, wow, it feels like we just keep repeating history every 20, 25, 30 years, right? That we're in cycles, that we run in cycles. And it is true, we do run in cycles. The seasons run in cycles, our lives run, I mean, everything does run in cycles. So it would seem that that is the case as well. But is it a situation where these cycles are, if you think of a wheel, right? Are we rolling up? Are we ascending in that, right? We might be repeating similar cycles. Are those tests coming back to say, hey, you missed too many questions on this test, right? And maybe it's built into our whole identity as a humanity anyway. But this is just the way it always is because the system is such that self-correcting, right? The system is now of our humanity is self-correcting, where it revisits certain aspects to see, oh, did we learn a particular lesson? And then that advances us forward and upward, right? On the high road, we hope, right? Not on the low road. But that doesn't mean that we're perfect, right? Because remember, if we were perfect, we would just shoot straight up, right? So it's kind of an ascension over time, right? So don't be afraid of cycles, I guess is the thing there. Don't be afraid of the cycles if you're like, wow, we're in these cycles. No, look at it and say, okay, we're in a cycle. What can we learn this time that we didn't get right last time? And then make a correction, right? And we have to it has to be a conscious correction. It has to be something that we do differently, right? I don't know if it was Einstein or who's like, the definition of insanity is, essentially doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Hello, maybe he was cluing us into the cycles, right? Breaking free, or ascending despite the cycles. The cycles are part of the machine. Let's just look at it from that perspective. But are we going to apply what we're learning, what we have learned, right? What is there further to learn, right? We have to be inquisitive enough. At no point do we ever, grow our culture by just sitting back, in the quicksand and just, letting the quicksand suck us down under, right? That's going backwards, right? There's a clear demarcation here that essentially is if you do nothing, nothing will happen, right? Nothing good for sure, right? And that isn't a solution. It's too obvious, too simplistic to think, well, back in the day, blah, blah, blah. Well, sure, back in the day, we didn't have certain things. And the same people who say back in the day, not all, of course, there's a thin thread of those cultures out there that don't, but the rest of us do. Do you have a washing machine? Right? Do you have any kind of climate control in your home? Even if it's a fan, do you have a phone? I mean, even if it's a hard line, right? You probably don't have a hard line either, but a hard line. Do you have these things or more or better, right? Even if you don't have a computer and you're like, I don't want to do it with computers, you have something that came from the transformative nature of us learning and transforming and evolving, right? Culture evolving forward and upward, right? Now, does that mean that the same phone that was used to call for help is the same phone that was calling for other stupid things too? Things that were hurting people, right? Absolutely, right? The hammer isn't evil. The hammer can build a home or it can shatter the glass, right? It can be used for destructive purposes. It's a tool. The hammer doesn't carry a state of being, okay? We do. We carry that state of being. This is why we can't sit back, because we're also a tool in a sense, right? In a sense, we are all tools, right? Multi-purpose tools, I hope. And when we apply ourselves, then what? We create, we build, and this is how we evolve. Now, this you may say, well, that sounds pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I didn't need to watch this video to understand that. You may not have. have to have watched this video to glean that. But there are other things we have to pull into this. We have to pull into what are the constraints that are inhibiting us from learning particular lessons as a culture, right, as a humanity, that are preventing us from making the strides, right? Because even though we may be ascending ever so gradually, right, we can still improve upon the timeline of that. We can improve upon the degree of that, right? It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a straight shot like a F-15 straight up to the clouds, okay? But we can have an effect on the degree, right, and the rate, okay? And that's where we come in as humans. So now step back and we say, okay, now what are some of the constraints that we are still dealing with that are preventing us from ascending as a team, right? As a culture, as a humanity. If we're looking at, we're out in space floating around, looking down on the earth, what is preventing, come on, people, whatever. Or your hometown, you're floating above that in a helicopter, or, you're above your house doing, fixing your roof and you're looking down, whatever it might be, whatever the scope, it doesn't matter. What are all of the constraints that are preventing us from what? Improving upon that rate and degree. Well, some of this, okay, and this won't be all inclusive. You could probably get a sheet of paper out yourself and start making a list. This. And it will sound like whining and complaining, and that's okay. Sometimes you just got to get it out on paper, okay? But ultimately, the thing that is stopping us from being better teammates, better neighbors, better, more involved and more effective in the community, all of these things starts within us, okay? Because you have to remember that all of existence is a framework, okay? And then the physical world that we live in is a framework. And then every living thing within that is a framework, right? And then all the individual types and thises and that's are a bunch of frameworks, all the way down to you as a framework. And then within you, you are a framework. And with you, there are other frameworks, right? You have heating and cooling, you have electrical, you have plumbing, right? you have your CPU for your computer, right? You've got all of that. You're receiving data, right? You're transmitting, you're a transmitter, right? You have your communication device. It's all built into us, folks. But within it, right, there's all of these frameworks, all the way down to what? Our heart. Now, yes, physically, but even metaphorically, if we're thinking about it from that place with which we identify our humanity and everybody else in it, right? That thing that goes, we're all family, ultimately, right? Even if you don't like all your family members, that identifies you to the family, okay? And those frameworks, these are the things we have to work on, right? So what do you see? And you see bubblings of this, which is amazing in some respects, right? You see a lot of great things with diet and health that are out now. It's like, hey, do this and don't do that, and all the things, right? All the do's and the don'ts. Eat these things. Will if you eat this, then this will improve your X and your Y and your Z and all the great learning and breakthroughs that have come to be, right? So these are some of the things that we can address within our own framework, right? And that might be just for our physical health, but it also plays into our mental health too, right? And our emotional health. Also, our patterns of behavior, right? How we're going about things. Are we getting enough rest? Are we getting enough exercise? Are we, those sorts of things. Doing that in a way that doesn't feel like we're nagging ourselves to death, okay? Or hopefully no one else is doing that to you. But these are frameworks. And to improve the culture outside of us as a framework, we have to work on our own internal framework. Well, what do you think is the biggest blockage we have from going to, to get better, more exercise, or to eat right, in a better way, right? Or to work on our connections with others and how we interact in our communication? What do you think all the things that we do within this framework, that it's responsible, impacting the world around us and within us, what do you think the primary blockage is, constraint is to what? That transformation and that growth. It is the ego. Now, the ego is not without purpose. The ego has a purpose, okay? The ego is the thing that goes, you know what? I need to, it gets you in gear. It's a planner. It's an organizer. It's a doer, right? Functionally, it can be great for tasks and that sort of thing, right? You're going to go out and build a dog house. Okay, I'm going to build my dog a new dog house. Oh, I got to find the nails. Got to do it, right? It can plan and organize and do all of these things, right? And it wants to perform in excellent ways, right? But the ego doesn't want to be told what to do. And this is the challenge, okay? The ego doesn't want anyone saying, hey, this is why micromanagement isn't, it's not a good thing anyway, but this is also another reason why you see such a repulsion to it. It's not just that it's bad, it is, but it's also because it rubs right up against everybody's ego. You're really rubbing my ego raw when you're trying to micromanage me and do this over the shoulder, right? When people do that to you, that is rubbing your ego raw. Okay. Now your ego can be a problem to be overcome, but your ego can even struggle with others too, right? so the ego has a difficulty. If you're a person who's open to learning, then it's an easy step to understand that the person who is micromanaging, in this example, obviously a little left turn here, but that the person micromanaging is afraid, right? Micromanagement is the reflection of fear of failure, okay? Fear that we're not going to pull it off, fear we're not going to get the job done and the order out, and the fear, right? There's validation, but then there's micromanagement. It goes too far, right? Validation is, are we going to make it? I just want to know. Okay, are we going to have trouble that we have to react to make another plan? But that's not fear. Fear is micromanagement, where you start, hovering and getting in the way. Okay, you're just getting in the way. But the ego doesn't like that either. So, but it also is what the the manager's micromanagement is coming from ego, and the ego is also fearful. Now, when the ego is being used correctly, it can build, it can create, it can do some wonderful things. But when the ego's not, it can pick you apart, right? It can be the thing that makes you feel, it could shame you, right? You're watching TV and you're starting to feel bad about something. The ego is probably shaming you, It's putting you in your place. It's keeping you in your place. Don't grow, right? Don't get better. We're comfortable just right here. Okay. Yeah, this isn't great and that's not great. It will justify a lot of things, okay? And it will force you to defend things to others too that don't require defense, right? Which is a slippery slope when you do need to defend yourself from silly things. But typically the things you have to defend yourself from, here's how you know whether it's your ego or someone else's. And I know I'm further afield down the left turn here, but how do you know if it's your ego or their ego that's trying to, take control? Well, if they're challenging you, making you feel shameful or distrusting or questionable or essentially there's a gaslighting element to it, passive aggressive, whatever. If you're getting that from another person, that is coming from their ego, okay? Because by gosh, you are not going to grow any taller or any higher, or your life's not going to get any better while they're in your life or in your circle, okay? And so their ego is working to keep you, to put enough doubt within you to make your internals, basically you're juggling 15 chainsaws, right? Because now they're giving you more things to consider. Well, am I this? Am I that? Should I? Maybe I'm off base, and that's how you know. If somebody else is trying to get you to question yourself, even after the fact, subtly, right? Then that's how you know it's coming from their ego. How do you know if it's your ego? If what they're saying isn't trying to belittle you. It's supportive. Hey, that's great. But now you say, well, I don't know. I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm right for this. And da, da, da. If you're self-talk, that's coming from ego also, right? So that ego, again, it can be coming from external, but it can be just as easily come from the internal. And sometimes we confuse being humble, right? We think, well, I'm being humble because I don't want to assume and da da da, and I'm playing kit glove with things, and I'm just, just taking it, little steps, and I don't want to offend anybody. And look, folks, we're all humans. We've all done this, okay? And we've all, at some point, right? You hedge on that conversation you need to have. Everybody has done that. This conversation I need to have. I don't want to have it. I don't know where it's going to go. It could go all upside down, right? And there is an a fear, basically, an underlying fear. That's how you know the ego's messing with your brain, right? Rather overcome these things. If it's somebody else doing it, well, first of all, it depends on your relationship. It's like you could create more of a battle by a confrontation with that, or it's a little bit like water off a duck's back. Understand that, you're dealing. See them as a small child, going. I don't know. I don't, with all the doubts and fears, right? Which you expect from a small child, in an unknown situation. But from an adult, right, that's not so much. So you shrink down this person in your mind and go, yes, the fear has taken them over. Okay, they're useless to me right now. I love you, but you're useless to me. Now, move forward. So you see how this ego within ourselves and this ego, and you can apply this to many situations, folks. This could be you doing anything throughout your day, interacting with anyone, interacting with yourself. You may be eating lunch, watching a video on your phone, and something that you watch, right? So not only that are we dealing with people, right, and in the environment, but we're also dealing with the media in all its forms, social media and others, pumping all kinds of stuff at us, pumping us up to be better. You get the good stuff, but then you're pumping yourself up to be like, oh, this is terrible, right? It's like you're getting beat down and picked up and beat down and picked up and beat down. It's like a bad cartoon, right? So this is what the ego, and folks, now this is within the framework of us. Remember, we started with the big framework and we got down to us. Now start going outward, okay? Do groups have ego? Well, sure they do, right? You 2 or 3 people, go to a dinner party. And, a lot of times what you end up seeing, women will go into this, room and, the kitchen or whatever. The men will be over here in the garage, I don't know, whatever, backyard, depending on the time of year, right? and then you get that swirl. Now it's essentially they're going through the forming, storming, norming, and performing, okay, within their group in a compressed manner. And they may be storming within that group if they don't all get along, okay? But if they do get along, they go right to norming. And next thing you know, they're kind of a consensus. They're quickly going to be a consensus group of 2, right? 2 different groups. Now you bring them together and then that group and so on and so forth, right? And I'm using that as an example because as you pan out, right, to groups of people, yes, there is ego to overcome in these situations. There's ego to overcome at the local level, right? You go into your church, you think ego isn't there? Absolutely, it's there. It's what we're mostly there to overcome, okay? That's what, if you're a Christian, that's essentially, if you look at it, if you step back, most of what Christ said is, hey, you need to drop the you and be looking at the we, right? There's more to accomplish here. Follow me, right? Not sit here and talk about me. Okay, let's go. Let's get this ball rolling. Let's start to build, right? Let's move this forward and upward. Not let's sit around and go, oh, woe is me and all these things, okay? So it is understanding that the ego is an impediment. It's an impediment when it's not, it's a hammer, okay? The ego is a hammer. And if you let that hammer make decisions in areas of your life that it shouldn't be making decisions, no, that's not healthy, okay? So you have to have balance, right? I'm not gonna change the channel on my TV with a hammer, right? It's just not the appropriate tool. So right tool, right job, right? And definitely don't use the wrong tool for the wrong job. Same thing, said differently. But here we go. So you pan back and you start to see the groups get bigger. Now we're looking at the local level. Now, in America, the state level, maybe the region, the country, right? And then you start to see where there is basically a consensus ego, okay, to overcome. You could say the pride of any group is the ego, okay? Again, there's the good connotation to that, and then there is the bad connotation, right? And what? Pride goes before the what? Right? Pride goes before the what? Pride goes before the fall. Fall. Been telling you the whole way, right? The ego is what you notice before the fall. Those who are riding the egoic horses constantly, using the wrong tool for the wrong job, right? And failing to understand that ego has been a blockage to their growth, right? Their ability to grow, are also slowing probably parts of your community and all that. If we're talking about individually, right? So there's us, there's individually, there's as groups, okay? And then as we're panning outward, obviously the groups get bigger until we're talking about all of humanity. Now look at all the impediments to humanity's overall transformation because of what? Ego. It all comes back to ego. A fighting for materialism, that's ego. That's born of fear. I don't have enough, right? I don't have enough. I need to keep more, right? More, right? The kids go out on do Halloween, right? And they're doing their thing. They get some candy. They come back. Most kids, I don't care. But there's going to be some who, I remember when I was a kid, there were some kids who would run around and steal bags of candy from other kids, right? It wasn't enough to just, go do the thing. They had to have more, and they would do anything to get it. Now, that is an example of materialism, okay? That is ego-driven materialism, okay? It's born from fear. We might look at that situation and say, well, why did they do that? Well, they just did that to be pains in the tail. Well, maybe, but what it drives that lack, and maybe they didn't have food at home. Maybe they don't have that. They don't get to ever have snacks, and it isn't justification, but there may be a core element in there, right? So again, fear, ego, all of it. If we don't overcome ourselves, what do you think happens to us? We fall into that materialism trap. We fall into this whole notion that it's trying to keep up with the Joneses. I don't know why you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, but whatever. But that's what it ends up becoming. And so it's that hedonic treadmill, right? And so rather than helping out our neighbors and serving community, right? And doing all the just and right things, now we're trying to outrun our neighbors. We're trying to trample over whoever we can. I'm not saying we as individuals are, we may not be thinking like that at all. But what is our individual and collective action adding up to? Okay, what is it adding up to? Because it may not be that you're running around being, say, a materialistic or fearfully driven human, right? But you have to ask yourself, and this is another aspect, what obsessive behaviors do you have? Are you a person who goes to the gym 7 days a week? Not knocking it. If you do, you do. But can you not go for 2 or 3 days of the week? If I said next week, don't go to the gym for 3 days, can you not go? Because if you can't do that, then it's an addiction. Okay, it's no worse, it's no, I won't say worse. It may be a good addiction, but it is an obsessive behavior, right? So apply that to anything, right? It doesn't matter what it is. So you may think, well, but it's healthy, it's this, it's that. Yeah, but is it healthy? We know the body has to rest, right? So I think the science tells us differently. And most people don't go to the gym 7 days. Now, maybe you go to the gym, but do you actually work out 7 days a week? You see where I'm going with that. We can also our ego can also be stroked with the habits. Anything, and this is tough, folks. This is tough. We all have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, if I'm part of this, group, and we go do our thing 3 or 4 times a week. I can actually say when I coming up, I played basketball as a kid, eventually coached, but played my entire life, and I felt like I had to go to the gym or play basketball 2 or 3 times a week, to get the run in, right? I had to do it. I was addicted, right? I was addicted. And only getting older is pretty much the only thing that pulled me out of that, to transform out of that, right? So you have to own it, folks. You have to own the thing. It could be a healthy thing, right? But is it pulling away from your family time? Is it pulling away from your being productive? Is it pulling away from other areas that need balance in your life, right? Because how think of us as ball bearings. If you don't know what ball bearings, a bunch of small metal ball bearings say that goes into a set of ball bearings. If you don't know what that is, and I probably can't explain it to you, you have to look it up. But anyway, ball bearings help wheels and gears turn. Okay, so if we're not smooth, round, polished ball bearings, how well do you think the wheel turns? It may turn pretty well for a while, but at a certain point, there's going to be heat and friction, and then either melting or shattering, and then you're going to see the bearings break down. But the bearings just don't break down themselves. When they break down, it breaks down potentially other bearings and or the wheel and or the vehicle that they're attached to, or the other item, machine. Okay? So this is why we have to understand that the ego is the thing that's keeping us from being polished, right? And that isn't to say we're going to be perfect, but more polished. Let's put it that way. Okay. So we're not looking for perfection here. We're just saying, hey, we want to increase our degree and our rate of climb, right? And why is that? Because if we don't, we need to do that. And why is that? Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to overcome, because that's what we need to do, work together, right? The degree and the rate is what's going to help us overcome the challenges we have with food, water, right? Energy, all these big ticket issues, right? That we have as culture globally. We're not going to find solutions to those things if we aren't working together at our optimum, to our best, to the best that we can do, that we can contribute. If we're not doing that, then the result is not going to be overcoming those things. What may take us, what doing very little may take, 30 to 50 years, by us improving individually, right? Mentally, emotionally, right? Physically, all the health things too, right? And then, of course, what we do, improving on all these areas, that's going to help that degree and rate. And maybe we don't have to wait 30 to 50 years. Remember, our kids and grandkids are affected by this rate, right? And if you're a kid, your kids, right, are going to be affected by this rate. So it can be a benefit to us, right? We're increasing the likelihood of improvement and getting to a place where culture now has more cohesion, better synergy, the greater ability to solve problems. We can essentially achieve exponential leaps that allow us to potentially leap over problems that right now seem too big in our face. Like, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve these things? Well, how we have to solve them is we have to deal with our internal framework, right? Build that up so that becomes our external, right? Our external doing, and so on and so forth, as individuals, right? Community, culture, and then as that culture expands. And we have to overcome our egoic constraints. Those are blockages, okay? Those are blockages that are preventing the framework from being healthy, because as we looked at ourselves as framework, we can look at those larger portions of culture, if we were to grow those out as framework. Are we healthy, right? And then the next size group out could be your family, could be your friends, could be your community, your groups, all the things. Are they healthy? Are they healthy? At what point does it start to go, I don't think they're that healthy, right? That's where the challenge is. That's where your constraints are. Maybe your egoic challenge isn't in your home necessarily. Some, it might be in your home. You may have got to just a family and went, oh yeah, or friends and went, oh yeah. And some of you may got to, like your local community or maybe churches or groups you're involved with, right? Social groups and otherwise, right? Community groups and so forth. It may be, right? Political groups, duh, right? So there's constraints in these things. What are preventing you, right, from what is preventing us from a cultural transformation that improves its degree and rate? Okay, so these are some things to consider. Obviously, there's plenty of problems and I say problems, plenty of challenges in front of us, right? Plenty of challenges in front of us individually and otherwise. Identify where the ego is blocking you. Identify where you're getting pulled into a fearful thought or well, if I do this, then I won't have that. If you start to get in the I thing, start to be, if you're thinking like that, then and also too, remember, if you're doing things thinking, well, this will help others too, and it's really not, but you're trying to convince yourself that it is, we don't want to, I would say gaslight, but we don't want to gaslight ourselves into thinking that what we're doing is actually helping others, right? Well, it may not be helping anyone at all, right? So we have to be aware of that. We have to have checks and balances within ourselves and say, okay, am I really helping others when I'm doing this? It might be those realizations help you realign the balance of your schedule, right? The schedule of your life. So, all right, folks, I think we've touched on that enough. Just marinate on that and find areas where you can, improve and help your life personally and those around you, improve and thrive and transform. That is what's going to help culture to transform. And being able to have transparent, open conversations about these things also will help transformation, right? Remember, everything hidden will be revealed. So it's always best just to get it all out of the way. Okay. All right, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not first willing to transform on the inside. This is so important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.